Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's had some nice lunch and you're ready to listen to some very stimulating views and take part in a fantastic debate. Let me start off by telling you first that you're all on video and camera. This event is being live streamed, and so you can do what you like with that. You can perform, do whatever you wish, but please vigorously join in and take part. And I just want to say right at the beginning that although this is a discussion and a presentation, it's also a bit of a workshop. And at the end of this workshop, we want to gather some real ideas to take forward. So I would like everybody throughout to try to think of what they might suggest will make a change for the better in the area that we're about to discuss. So my name is Sunand Prasad. I'm an architect, and I have a fantastic panel that I will introduce to you in a moment. We're really here to talk about the kind of people we need and the sort of knowledge we need to develop and generate and refine in order to move to a more sustainable built environment. And we can interpret that in a very, very wide way, all the way from the circular economy, the donut economy, the planetary limits, in a really wide sense, which is, of course, inherent in the word itself. This session has been put together by EDGE, which is a partner in Futurebuild. And the EDGE is a self-organizing, slightly maverick group of professionals absolutely committed to interdisciplinary thinking and working. And it meets, has discussions, series of debates. I think we're now on debate number 90-something. And it's all on the web. And it's a unique organization which has been going on for many, many years, over a decade. And one of the things that it has contributed is a series of extraordinary papers that throw light on our industry in a radical and ethically based way. So we will talk shortly about education, research, and professionalism in its widest sense. I want to say also at the start that in all this conversation, there will be the discussion of ethics. And I just want to tell you that at 3:40 today, there is a specific workshop also organized by the EDGE on ethics, if you'd like to go along to it. So let me introduce our panel to you. From my far left, Flora Samuels is a professor of architecture in the built environment in the University of Reading, and she's also the first vice president of research at the RIBA. And she's written a book called Why Architects Matter. And it contains things that you may not immediately infer from the title. So the next person we have is Dr. Emma Wilcox. She's Chief Executive Officer of the Society for the Environment, which has 7,500 registered professionals in it and growing. Emma has a doctorate in material science, specifically in the phases of platinum and the crystalline phases of platinum, and comparing it with steel. And I can reveal, its phases are very similar. Next up, we have Simon Foxell, who is a prime mover behind the EDGE. He's an architect, has run his own practice for a long time, and he's quite a prolific writer and theoretician in the areas of professional behaviors, ethics, the challenges that face professions, and so on. And the latest of his many books is the magisterial and readable and must-have book, Professionalism for the Built Environment, which I think uniquely traces the history of a number of built environment professions, but also brings it right up to date. And it's a bit of a textbook as well if you want to know how we've got to where we've got to today. And finally, and they will be speaking in that order, and I won't be jumping up and down introducing them. They'll smoothly, like an oiled machine, go one after the other. Professor Alexandra Wright is Head of Architecture, University of Bath. I've known Alex for a while, and we collaborated on a radical review of architectural education, which resulted in a report called Pathways and Gateways, which fundamentally argued for a much, much more loose, much freer and diverse approach to how we train, educate, and professionalize architects. So, without further ado, I ask Flora to kick us off.
Thank you, Sunand. Hello, everybody. Right, I'm going to start off by talking about the professional challenge of research. Research in the built environment is a very undeveloped field, but I think there's incredible scope for us going forwards. So I'll whip through a few slides as prompts. First of all, in the UK context, I just want to show this slide because this is a focus group we did with a bunch of architects to find out where they got their information from. So it's a matrix from heavily used to not heavily used, rigorous to non-rigorous. And what it showed is that architects, that if they need to find some information out, they tend to ask their mate at the next desk, or they go on Google. In fact, the last place an architect will ever go to get information is an academic refereed journal, which is a very, very sorry indictment for academia. But what it means is the profession is constantly reinventing the wheel based on really second-class information. It's a big concern. In terms of research funding, this graph shows the creative industries and where architecture sits. And sorry for the emphasis on architecture, but you can infer quite a lot of the rest built environment from it. Architecture is the green little slab at the top, and you can see that it's quite pathetic next to the other creative industries. And the creative industries are, of course, the fastest generator, the fastest growing industry in Britain at the moment. So we're really failing to capitalise on research opportunities. And I think in nowhere does this come down to more than post-occupancy evaluation. There aren't really many statistics, but it seems that as little as 3% of architects are going back and seeing whether their buildings actually work. And sometimes I say 3% and people go, oh, as much as that? You know, it's really terrible. So at the RIBA, we're trying to do a concerted effort to normalise post-occupancy evaluation. We just have to. And of course, we've got the situation, brickies are paid more than architects. And I think a lot of this comes down to the way that architects express value. I mean, I should say other parts of the built environment aren't paid an awful lot either, it seems. So that's the context. So how can the research culture of the built environment be improved? Well, I wrote a book with Anne Dye at the RIBA trying to express architectural research, well, to express what practitioners do in the language of research, formal research. So that would be like a single practitioner in Northern Ireland, and we wrote up her work in terms of aims, methodologies, and so on in a formal way. Because we're trying to encourage architects to see so much of what they do actually is research. And I believe it's not a big journey to express architecture or what architects do as formal research. And Sunand mentioned ethics. Ethics plays a big role in this, and the role in which architectural research is respected in the outside world. The RIBA has just done a big ethics commission. Work is going to chunt us through, which I think is going to be very exciting. But I put on the left-hand side of this a University of Reading ethics application, because I have PhD researchers who are working in practice, who can do pretty much anything in practice at the moment, ethically, but if they work within a university context, they have to be extremely careful. And I think it's a very odd world when these two cultures are operating so differently. We absolutely have to align architectural practice with ethics. And I believe that we have, in architecture and the built environment, planning and so on, we have an amazing research methodology, which is Design Studio. And Design Studio is something that people in other fields are pinching, like Stanford Business School is pinching it to teach business people how to be more creative, or ethnographers are starting to pinch it to use their work. And I think we don't make enough of it. We think we've got to go and borrow methods are rather outside, but actually Design Studio is a brilliant way of democratically generating research together. And the future challenges of research are all going to be about working together. And I personally think that academics need to do much, much more to help practice to face the dragon of measurement culture. This is where my work lies. How can we help practitioners to express their value in a manner that they relate to, and they don't just feel that they're an increment of financial money, in a sense. But I think academia has not been encouraged to work with practitioners, and we must do that. And I have to, I mean, Alex is going to be talking about education, but I have to say I'm very critical of the RIBA validation criteria, not least because it doesn't allow us to develop an education for uncertainty, which includes things like research training, participatory techniques, and business and entrepreneurship. Not nearly enough business and entrepreneurship. So I think we've got to do something about that. And we've got to help students learn to be team workers. This is a little illustration of a project we do every year at Reading, working with Piers Taylor of Invisible Studio. Now, we really need to also support practices to take advantage of research funding. There's lots of research funding out there, and there was 80 billion of research funding through the European Horizon 2020 programme, but I only ever found 2 architectural practices that got access to that funds, and that was Foster's and Zaha Hadid, and they weren't leading on those bids. So we really lost that opportunity. But we've got an opportunity at the moment with the sector deal on the industrial strategy for construction. And there's, if you care to look out this website, there's some beautiful projects at the moment, up to 100,000 small projects for innovation in the construction industry, but the deadline's in April. So keep an eye out for those. There's so much potential there. I think that one of the things, particularly in the regional parts of the country, that universities and practice need to do is share their Fab Lab facilities. This is Umeå University in Sweden, where they have a place where you can laser cut your Christmas card if you want to, if you're a member of the community, but it's also the place where they're doing the first spray, robotically created house made out of sawdust and glue. And I think that's how we should be working together. And another way in which universities and architects practices and planners and so on can work together is through the development of urban rooms. You may have heard of urban rooms. They're a place where universities, industry, and the community can work together, and this network is really starting to grow. How else can we work together? Well, institutions, they play a really key role in encouraging collaborative research. And I don't know if any of you speak Dutch, but this is from the website of the BNA, which is the Dutch RIBA. And this woman, Jutta, I'm a big fan of hers, because what she does, if there's a problem that they have in Holland, like, for example, disused schools in the north of Holland, she goes around gathering money from stakeholders, and then she sets up a research competition which brings together, say, architects with digital designers, say with pharmacists, a really, really interdisciplinary bunch, which kickstarts the whole collaborative interdisciplinary research effort, and it's brilliant, and it's what I want for us to do at the RIBA. So sharing knowledge, vital, and we don't do enough of it. This is a photograph of the Research Practice Leads group, a group which has about 40 practitioners and people who lead on research and practice, and we meet every 2 or 3 months to talk about innovations in research. And there's one of those started up in Wales, there's one starting in Scotland this week, and there's one in Newcastle. And I think we need more of that stuff. It's where we share innovation. And just to mention, if you have not had access to the R&D tax credits, please, please, please go and try and get some R&D tax credits. I can't tell you the success that this research practice leads have had with this. People who really thought that they weren't going to get any money out of their accountants. Don't be put off by lazy and dismal accountants. Try and find a creative accountant who will do a good job by you. Last of all, I think universities and practices have to be future-facing together. And this is a timeline developed by A Studio, who are a practice in London, and they have this on the wall of their reception, which I really love. And it goes right up to 2050, and they're doing work with Brunel University on product design, and they're doing work with Newcastle University, growing mushroom architecture, all manner of stuff. And I think that it's just so exciting for the practice, and it's so exciting for the profession to see a real change, a sea change of interest in research as we go forward. So thank you for listening. I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Oh, you don't need to click that. Sorry. I kidnapped it.
So thank you. So I've got about 10 minutes to talk about professional standards. Now that's something I can talk about for days. So I didn't think I'd do slides. I just want to explain to you why I think professional standards are so important and relevant to everybody here. So firstly, I'm a huge advocate of education. I think it's a really important part of addressing lots of challenges, be they societal or all the other challenges, but I'm going to leave these guys to talk to you on the education element. And I'm going to talk about professional standards beyond education, actually when you're out in the workplace and you have been there for a few years as well. So first of all, I need to declare a bit of a conflict here. So my organisation, Society for the Environment, we run 2 professional registers. We register environmental professionals, so chartered environmentalists and environmental technicians. And we partner with 25 amazing professional bodies to do that for us. So why is professional registration important? So first of all, I just wanted to break down a little bit about actually what does it mean? How do you become professionally registered? Many people focus on the getting it, but actually it's the maintenance of it that I think is the critical part, so I'll come back to that. So first of all, when you become professionally registered, you are demonstrating your competence to your peers. It's not what I think, it's actually what your peers think. And you're demonstrating that underpinning knowledge that you really do understand your subject, but you're also demonstrating that you've been applying that out in the real world, in the workplace. And that is really what gives you the basis on the day that you gain your professional registration. That is really what it's about. And that's really important, and that's a real key focus. But actually the other 2 pieces often get missed, and actually I think this is where most of the value comes in. So the second is a code of conduct. So when you gain professional registration with us, you're signing a code of conduct about how you are going to work. This isn't what you are going to do. This is actually how you work in the real world. So somebody working with you, an employer who employs you, a client that you're working with, will understand the personal commitment that you have made to a code of conduct. And we touched on ethics very briefly. But this is a really important part of this. People really understand from you, you are technically competent, your peers think so, and this is how you are going to work. And for me, that is very, very important. The final part is actually about maintaining your competence. So it's all very well being given professional registration on a date 10 years ago, but what about today? Are you still competent? Have you maintained that? And that's where continual professional development comes in. And most people at this point will groan and say, oh no, got to fill in a form, don't like doing it. Absolutely, it's all of that. But what CPD is about is you demonstrating that you are maintaining your competence. It wasn't just 10 years ago. Whether that's a very broad understanding of an area or a very deep personal understanding of a specific subject, it's really important. So by demonstrating your professional competence to your peers, by committing to a way of working, and then by maintaining that competence, that for me is what makes professional registration. That's the really important parts behind it. So okay, so that's kind of what it is. Why is it important? So for me, if you are an employer, or if you are contracting a service, or if you are setting a policy, you want to know that the people who are enacting that really do know what they're talking about. From an environmental perspective, we really do want people who are competent to take decisions, to advise people, to use really good evidence, because it's very easy to go off at a tangent, to take wrong information, and to do something potentially quite damaging that I'm sure none of us want. And professional registration really gives people the confidence that they are doing their very best to make those right decisions. But for me personally, working with people who have demonstrated that professionalism, that professional registration, I think it says an awful lot about a person who is willing to go through the processes to gain professional registration and to maintain it. I mentioned the code of conduct. It says an awful lot about how someone works, how they collaborate, how they want to be part of a broader network. And I think you can take some real assurances and comfort in that person standing up for the professionalism. Which brings me on to my final point, really. A lot of people say to me, well, I'm already most of the way through my career, or I've got this far without having professional registration. That's for people who are starting on the journey. Why is it relevant for me? And for me, this is where a bit of self-responsibility comes into this. If we want to be in a profession that is governed by professional standards, then it's all of our responsibility to put ourselves up to those standards. It's no good saying, well, I just think they should do it because they're coming through, if you're not willing to do it yourself. It's something that, as a profession as a whole, we should stand up for and say, this is the way we want to work. This is part of the profession that we want to be in. And I think it's really important for employers to be looking at how they recruit people, how they retain people, and the messages they send out, and equally policymakers as well. So whether that's embedding it in recruitment, embedding it in retention, in promotion, really thinking about actually, what does this say about our workforce? What does this say about us as an employer? And what does this say about us as a profession or an industry? So I'll just finish off by saying, for me, professional standards really set the tone of a profession, but actually it's all of our responsibility to make sure that they are implemented and that we all stand up for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. As Sunand said, I published at the end of last year a book about the professions in the built environment, and the book is both a history and looking forward at the future, and it's mainly the future bit I'm going to focus on. It deals mainly with the three professions of surveying, engineering and architecture, but by the end of the book it really is dealing with all the professions across the industry. So just sort of, where are we now and where are we currently going? This is a graph of time against the size of the biggest 20 practices in our industry. The blue is the 10 biggest and the red is the 20 biggest. And you can see that over the last 20 years, they have more than doubled in size of the people working for them. And that is where we've been since the recession of the 1990s. That those very big multidisciplinary firms have been hoovering up more and more of the professionals in the industry, so more of us are working for them. But of course, they're taking even more of the work projects. And as part of that, they developed into service providers more than professional bodies. They are large corporations. They are owned at a distance, often internationally, and they work with underlying business propositions. And that has set up a huge tension in our industry between what we might have described as purely professional values, the kind of things that we get sort of inculcated in when we at university learning our trade, and the desire effectively to run big businesses across the globe to deliver products. And that tension is still being worked out. But in order to do that, those big companies are beginning to set up their own sort of quasi-professional routes within themselves. So they do some education, they have their own code of conducts, they have their own disciplinary processes, they have their own whistleblowing processes that allow them to operate effectively without the traditional professional structures. And, and of course, they also means that they're not always very sort of effective at making sure they don't get into trouble. And it's worthwhile saying that Atkins, that was bought a couple of years ago by SNC-Lavalin, they are now involved in pretty much the downfall of the Canadian government, which has never happened really before for a professional firm. And the other thing that they've become very concerned with is making sure that risk management is top of their agenda more than any other topic. And part of that risk management is about diversification. So they offer services across a very wide field to a very large number of different clients. So if one sector goes down or whatever, that they can protect themselves against that. And so they are hoovering up all sorts of other disciplines that get brought into the companies that they run in order that the risk can be contained and they have other synergies that can bring work in. But during that time, it's also worth saying that the fees charged on any project have dropped hugely. In 2009, it was reckoned that in 10 years or so, they had dropped by 50%. It's not that we're getting paid less, it's probably that our productivity has gone right up. But it is also probably true that we're managing to give less care to individual projects, less reflection about what we do, more simply getting on with it and banging it out. And this has resulted not only in reduced fees, but a retreat down the supply chain that would be very well known to everybody, so that the architect becomes a sub-consultant and finds it quite difficult to talk to either the organisation commissioning our products or the users of them. And that clearly has led to a greater distance between architects, surveyors, engineers, and the bodies that use them. So the feedback loop has got frayed and more difficult to benefit from, which also then sort of leads to a loss of social purpose, one of the underpinning aspects of architects and other professionals. And finally, all of that leads to a loss of status. We've been going down the pyramid instead of up in recent years. And this has been studied by academics in various fields, but notably Julia Everts of Nottingham University, who has analysed this shift that's happened over the recent decades from what she calls occupational professionalism, or we would probably think of as traditional professionalism, which is controlled within the organisation, within professional bodies. It's a dialogue that happens between co-professionals and is there to drive up standards and so on, to one when you're much more beholden to the employer, and a lot of the professional processes happen within that organisation rather than within the community of practitioners. But having got to that position, we're facing a huge number of problems. All of these well known to you. I don't need to go through them individually, but each one of them is effectively a challenge to both practice and professionalism. Ones we urgently need to deal with, one that we will be blamed severely if we don't deal with them, and we will be found wanting by future generations who wondered why we were sitting on our hands just doing our day job and not tackling these as part of a professional responsibility. So, if professionalism has succumbed to commercialism, if it has dropped behind in giving a professional service to one that is based on client service, and has developed an organizational rather than occupational ethos, how can it actually be as part of the solution to the challenges that are faced by both the planet and society? This is a big question, because I hope we'd all agree that really it is our job to face those challenges, to do something about them, and to offer solutions. So as part of this, my view is that we have an opportunity to change direction. Not radically change direction, but change direction in a significant way that begins to show that we do agree that we will sort these things out. And that is by re-invoking our public interest obligation as professionals, something we've all signed up to. So we do have a full regard for the public interest. We will do the right thing. And most of the institutions, one way or another, spell this out clearly to their members. But what isn't clear is how that works out in practice. And this is, my view, is what the distinguishing feature of the professions are, and is our strength, and is effectively what we can offer to society going forward in the face of those challenges. And all the institutions do sign up to this, all the ones we're familiar with. So, just to sort of wind up, a 6-point plan, it's in the book. Professionals and their institutions and their disciplinary bodies and all the rest of it should be absolutely clear that the actions and decisions of professionals should be based on the public interest, and that's a wide sort of cross-cutting point of view. We should also agree, again, this is both individuals, practices, companies, professional institutions, to be far more open and transparent about what we do. We need to report and take responsibility for the outcomes and performance of what we do. We need to deal with the performance gap. If we don't do what we say we're going to do, we will never build the trust that we need to actually carry out and deliver the solutions to the challenges we face. We desperately need to rebuild knowledge, which is, of course, what Flora is talking about. There's a lot of stuff we know, but we don't implement. But there's also a huge amount of knowledge and research going on that we simply don't really have the tools to access. We need to re-embrace our impartiality and independence as professionals, and this is even if you work for a large company. You need to actually show that you have independent judgment and are prepared to stand by it, and the professional bodies need to support that. And the institutions need to collaborate across the piece. They're very siloed, and they need to embrace change, really, to sort this out. Emma talked about a code of conduct and the importance of it. My view is that the most important thing about a code of conduct is it is about the communication between professionals, clients, and society. It explains where our red lines are, what we will do, how we will deliver, and the standards that we will employ to do that. So unless it is clear about how it explains professionalism, it's not going to succeed. If it's purely aimed at the professionals themselves, it's not going to succeed. And as part of that, and part of the book, and with the Edge, we looked at all the professional code of conducts in the industry, including in private firms, including those developed by other bodies and within government. And we drew up the best out of all of that and prepared a model draft code of conduct. Because one of the fascinating thing is that none of the institutions have any discipline specific items to their codes. They're all generic, and they could all apply to anyone within the industry. And we put them into these categories. and which operate in the order given. So your prime duty is to the wider world, then society, then your clients, and so on. And I'm pleased to say the RIBA has adopted this structure in the current rewriting of its code of practice, and we're in discussion with other institutions to follow up on that. But we also prepared, as part of that discussion, a professional compact which tries to explain what the deal is between professionals and society, but particularly professionals and those who employ us. That we aren't just there to serve our clients' interests. We have a greater duty to deal with much wider societal, environmental problems. This is available on the Edge's website if you need to find it. And as I said, bits of that are going into the RIBA's new Code of Conduct, which also has this statement, possibly for the first time in the RIBA's history. It's never been that clear what members' duties are to the public interest. So just to say, none of this is new. It's been around for a long time. Professionals have this duty, and we need to make sure that we really do take it seriously and make sure that everyone understands that this is why we're here. This is what marks us out as being distinctive against other parts of the economy. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Good afternoon. Oh, I better hang on to this. My name's Alex Wright. I'd like to know a little bit about who's in the room, which is always a dangerous thing to do, in case everyone just sits on their hands. But are there any students in the audience? If you could put your hand up. Lovely. Thank you. Are there any people who would broadly categorize themselves as designers in the built environment? Very good. Architects. My Venn diagram's taking shape. How many of you would consider yourself to have an active involvement in either teaching at university or in research grants at universities? Okay, thank you. I mean, the reason I'm asking that is it's quite difficult sometimes to know who the audience is and quite how what I'm about to say might be received. But I'm going to talk mainly about architecture education and its relationship to research and the profession. This was the challenge that we were set, and the answer, or the question I'd most like to ask is really, are we unconnected? I suspect in many instances we are, and we would all recognize that. But also in some instances you might be surprised about how connected we already are in education, research and the profession. And I'd like to think a little bit about thinking about what future practice might look like, and a clue to that, I think, is in some of the examples that might already exist. There's a very well-used quote, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, from William Gibson, which is that the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. Now I'm going to offer a brief snapshot of my own institution, and I think I'll leave it to you to then decide and maybe debate whether it offers an option for the future or perhaps a reflection of the past. So at Bath, our research, for example, is multidisciplinary. For those of you that don't know much about Bath, one thing you might know is our history of researching and teaching architects and engineers together. Typically our research centres consist of architects and engineers, but also physicists and psychologists and all sorts of others. And we focus in specific areas, each of which is potentially full of impact on practice and the built environment. And at the last REF, Bath was ranked as first in the UK for research in the built environment, with 90% of our researchers being ranked as outstanding. The undergraduate courses at Bath are also, in terms of our teaching of architecture, unique in the UK. In 3 of their middle years, our students divide their time equally between time in practice and time at the university. This means that every year we have about 300 practice partners. Those are the practices that employ our placement students. They're the practices that academic staff go and visit. And this together allows us to have a triangular conversation between students, practice, and academics, hopefully to make sure we all better understand each other and to make sure we're connected. I'm not sure if you can read this. I think that's the list A to K of our practice partners in terms of placements from last year, and you might recognize your practice there, and that's going from K to Z. But it just gives an indication of how connected we already are just in that one aspect of our academic process. In terms of full-time research staff at the university, you might be surprised to know we're very small. We only have 18 full-time equivalent members of active research staff. And those staff have to cover a very large number of PhD students, quite a large suite and portfolio of master's courses, Masters of Science in a number of subjects, and of course all the research and grant work that we do at the university in the area of architecture and the built environment. What makes us somewhat unusual is within that staff profile we also have 11 full-time equivalents in terms of teaching staff or teaching fellows. In reality, these are 38 practitioners from environmental engineering, structural engineering, but principally architecture, who are responsible for teaching our students. And our entire offer to our undergraduate student population is founded on the fact that they will be engaging for 90% of their course delivery with teaching practitioners. And these are individuals that actually embody that connectivity between the profession, education, and research. In addition to those members of staff, every year we have about 300 invited lecturers, visiting critics, and other contributors to our programs. And that is always drawn from architecture and the built environment professions. So, for example, I'm not sure if there's any of you here that would recognize your name on this list from last year, but this is about half the people that contribute from practice to our university education, and that's the other half. So in terms of connectivity, I would argue that the stereotype whereby there are silos between academia, the profession, or even research and education, in many instances, not just Bath, but actually that stereotypical view is largely obsolete. What we are generally producing in academia and in practice is a collaboration between what we do, both in training and then in practice, for the advantage and the betterment of the profession and our students. However, you might say that at Bath we aren't particularly typical of what has been the activity in the sector. And I'm afraid here I have to engage in a bit of shameless PR. But if not in this context, in what context would it be more appropriate? I'm not sure. And I also have to justify the fact I've taken time out of my day job to be here today. So forgive me, but architecture has been ranked as the top UK School of Architecture at Bath, or Bath has been ranked as the top UK School of Architecture in at least one of the 3 National League tables for the last decade. And no other school can match that consistency of performance. Currently we're ranked as the #1 school in the Complete University Guide and the Times University Guide. I am healthily sceptical about the value and the reliability of those league table rankings, a scepticism which I will hang on to as doubtless in years to come we will plummet down to a more median position. But for the time being at least I take some comfort that that model of education, practice and research that we engage at Bath at least those rankings maybe suggest that there is some benefit and advantage to them. So what are the barriers to improvement that we face and that other educationalists face or any other educational and practitioners face? And that, I think, will bring us on to some potentially, or my suggestion for some key recommendations from this discussion. The first, and I'm afraid to say both of these ideas are rather boringly based on regulation. And the first is based on the regulation of our profession and our professional education. And that is, firstly, if we are going to attract the best and the brightest minds into our profession, we need to innovate, and we need for this a regulatory framework that promotes that innovation. We need to eliminate unnecessary barriers to entry, and we need to foster diversity in educational pathways. But we also need to effectively enforce the requirements for graduate knowledge and the skills related to environmental design. I would argue that currently our regulatory framework either fails or fails to adequately do all of these things well enough. The second recommendation I might suggest, or we could consider, is around the regulatory framework for the built environment. And my suggestion here is that we need to be altogether more ambitious. In my experience, we already have the ability, we have the professional knowledge, we have the evidence base in order to make appropriate, key, forward-looking decisions to the advantage of our wider society and the environment. I kind of agree with all my previous speakers that we could improve in each of these regards, but my experience in the roles I have is that the barriers to making a step change in improving what we do is not the lack of knowledge or professionalism or even in education. It's the fact that those people making key decisions are being driven by an agenda different from our own. And the only way that those who can be influenced into taking action, who could improve the situation, the only ready way we can do that is by a more ambitious and a change in the minimum standards of regulation regarding all aspects of the built environment. It's not the only change we need, but I think it's the key change. So thank you very much for listening.
Well, Alex, come and sit down. I'm just going to kick off with one or two questions, and then we'll try to have a combined discussions. Can I just check, are there roving microphones and things? There they are, and there's one there. Okay. So on the one hand, we've heard from Simon that there's a long way to go in many ways to get to a place where public interest, ethics, and so on are actually at the heart of what we do, because there's clearly one thing for the RIBA to sign up to that script, but another thing to have it promulgated in practice. But on the other hand, Alex, you're saying actually that things are either already improving or that our general trajectory is in the right direction. So I just want to explore, before we get on to looking at problems more, whether are things getting better? Because in a way, the question that's posed suggests that things are quite broken. So since you've just spoken, maybe Simon, you could comment in a way, treating what Alex has just said as a bit of a riposte.
Yeah. I don't think there's any problem with the understanding that we have to sort out problems. And clearly within the schools, they are teaching professionals to have, to use the tools, to develop the tools, to understand ways of doing it. What really seems to be missing is the sense that actually this is their job to deliver on these issues. as opposed to being, a job which is about delivering client value or other aspects. The challenges are such, and they are well understood. We hope that all the universities and so on are educating young professionals to understand that these are the challenges that they're going to face in their working lives. But then there seems to be some sort of lacuna between what the skills they have and the ability they have for solving problems and the will to say that they actually will do that.
But I mean, I think what's under my question is that Alex spends a lot of time with younger people, and there's a generation which might think that some of these are fights that we do not need to have any longer, because their own ethics and their own fundamental belief systems are already ahead of what many people see as outdated professional belief systems. Flora or Emma?
I think that's a really interesting point. I think generally we have been a society and a world probably very driven by economics, and I do hope that we are becoming a world that's driven by other things, and I think that's partly what we're seeing with some of the upheaval around politics and policies at the moment. But it's a challenge, isn't it? And I was just interested in you kind of putting that as a dynamic, that it's down to the individual. On the one hand, that they are trained in a certain way, but actually when they get into practice, it's all about something else. And actually I think we need to think the responsibility of that doesn't really lie with that individual. If their employer is driving them in a certain way and asking for certain things, a lot of the responsibility has to sit there rather than the person who is actually making those decisions and being driven in that direction.
Flora, any thoughts on actually what the future really holds? Because the future is different set of people from the ones which are sitting at this panel.
Well, I think that the younger generation are really waking up to climate change, and they're really waking up to the business and economics of the profession. They've got massive debt behind them. They don't want to earn less than a train driver. I think that they're getting very canny and very clever. And I'm afraid that a lot of what's been taught in schools is quite out of date. And I think we should be teaching students to be earning money while their eyes shut by delivering tools and apps and other things. It's just not going to be architecture in any way that we are familiar with. That's what I feel. So I think things are getting better, and I think innovation is really rising within the profession. But I think that the older generation have got a lot more to do to support the younger ones to get into the place they need to be in.
I think this might be the perfect moment to ask the audience to say something, and particularly invite people who are at the moment in training or thinking of a career to say what they think. So who would like to say something? Over there. Let me take 2 or 3 questions at the same time. So if there are other people with their hands up. Anybody else at the same time? Okay, so we'll come there and there. Thank you. Please.
Hello, everybody. My name's Katie Barker. I'm an architect, and I actually did my undergraduate degree at Bath. So, nice. Hello. I've got a couple of points. Obviously, I'm a young female architect. I own and run a design and build company, and we are also main contractors. So your sort of nice little diagram of where architects are now sitting in the construction industry, I really want to challenge that, because I don't think there's any reason why architects can't be the design and build contractor. And having been to Bath, it's very interdisciplinary, it's very team driven with the engineers, and that's obviously where I've come from and that's my background. And I think it's very clear in the students that I see and I work with that they have this mentality that they're part of a team. there's no ego, they're humble, they don't see that they are different to the engineers or the QSs or even the main contractors. They see that they're part of that team. And I don't see that there's any reason why architects can't be at the head of that team. And we should take that responsibility seriously. If we want to protect the profession, we want to protect the title, we need to step up to that, and we need to take that responsibility seriously. So that was just to touch on that one. And also for Alex, obviously I'm a big champion for Bath. It's got me where I need to be in life. How can we get other universities on board? How can we get that model out there? Because that's what I think is the future of construction, the teamwork and the collaboration. But I see a lot of students coming to me saying, crikey, I had no idea that I could do this. I had no idea that there was this kind of team out there. It's just not what I see in university.
Thank you very much. Over here? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Brian Perry from Lewis. I'm going to be sort of traditional, really, and say architecture is the mother of the arts, and not in a big way, but I think we've tended to forget that we should be good generals, and we should be not just good at art, but we should be good. This is one of the great challenges of architecture, that we're trying to synthesize art, business, science of building. It's a great challenge. I'm greatly encouraged when I went to Berlin recently and saw Sharon's Philharmonia, and I just thought it was such a wonderful building, and that was in the wake of a terrible war. They had the guts to actually build it and to raise the money. They saw it through, the vision. I think it's a great building. I think we need something of that kind of, those sort of guts now as well. In other words, a visionary approach to architecture. Labour were going that way, I thought, under Lord Rogers. We've lost it now, I think, completely with this government. And I'd like just to say that I heard Daniel Barenboim at the prom saying the dangers of isolationism. I was trying to avoid the B word, but I think everybody knows what I mean by that.
Yeah. Thank you. And there was one over here. Yes.
Hiya, I'm Cara, and I just wanted to thank, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, the lovely Flora, for bringing up the point of out-of-date schooling, because I am a young female carpentry apprentice, and I'm being taught how to build the problem on my course. And I've seen amazing things about amazing ideas, but unless you teach trades how to use those technologies, we can't build it. So, yeah, thanks for just bringing that up, because the teaching's out of date.
Thank you very much. So, who wants to plunge in? I'm going to try not to say anything, because they're fantastic questions. Flora, why don't you start?
Oh gosh, I don't know whether I'm supposed to respond to all three at once.
You can choose. You're free to choose.
I mean, I'm a great advocate building on the last point. I'm a big advocate of this idea of education for uncertainty. We don't know, we have no idea what practice is going to look like when we come out of it. And I think that we need to teach students ways of coping and being very swift on their feet and interdisciplinary and really good life skills. And I just don't feel that that's happening with the way that the current institutions have to present themselves. And this has other issues like EU policy and things like that. So I think that our built environment education has to deliver an education for work in the built environment. And I think that we've lost track of that. And one of the things at Bath they're quite clear about, actually. And I think that we don't know enough about how to deliver a really good education for the built environment, actually, because we've never really looked at it that hard. I'm afraid we've been too busy looking at architecture as an art. And while I believe architecture is an art as well, I think that there are other really key things that we can be learning. So I do think that education is going to be disrupted by itself by this new apprenticeship scheme coming through and all manner of things. So, but it's really good that you're vocal and you've got to keep making your point heard.
Thank you. Simon, do you want to pick up Katie's point about D&D?
I think sort of what the thread that leads through all three of those is the need for breadth of skill, but also probably depth of skill in the right places. And if I've learned anything from writing this recent book and our work with The Edge, is that we need to tackle our problems as an industry and beyond our industry. And sitting in places that says that this is what I was trained to do and this is what I will do for the rest of my life is probably a disaster. We need to collaborate across the piece. We need to work with many other disciplines to deliver what we do, and to do that, as you said, without ego. And I have a very problematic relationship with the idea that architects should be about the art and should see themselves as natural leaders. I think that has been actually a problem for us all to deliver good buildings. We need to be much better team players and need to work across with all sorts, from those who design to those who build to those who manage our buildings, to deliver real value that will be long-lasting and good for people and planet.
Good. Alex?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on a few points, and thank you very much, Katie. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for those kind words, and congratulations for you, because I think you are a good example, because I completely agree with a lot of the work that Simon's done and the images he's shown. I've seen examples before where the traditional built environment professions, when key decisions are being made, aren't even in the room. They're not even at the table. Their position down the decision-making tree has become so far removed to the point of the subcontractors you were talking about. And any advice they provide or any influence they have is filtered through at least one or two other voices before it even hits the ears of the client. And I think one of the ways around that is to just to abandon the idea of yourself as an architect, and you put yourself in a position where you are working directly as a design builder or some other professional role with the decision maker, because frankly I think that's where you will have more professional satisfaction in your working life. I think a lot of the problems that architects face in how they operate at the moment is the degree of frustration in how they operate due to where they find themselves in that decision tree that you spoke about earlier. And I'm aware that within that overall framework, typically, too often, minimum standards are taken as maximum standards. And that's why I think if we want to get a real change in built environment and the greening and the potential we have in this country with our expertise and our professions, we just need to have a quantum change in the ambitions we have for minimum standards, because otherwise those who are making the decisions will always default back to the least and not the best.
Okay, Emma, did you want to come in or get some
yeah,
questions?
I mean, I think firstly, so the young lady didn't catch your name. It's, for me, education is about being taught how to learn, not what to learn, and it's very much a lifelong, but absolutely stand up as you are doing and call that out, because you and the profession deserve so much better than that. So I think great.
Okay, can we
great
have just
saying
one
that,
more
thank you.
round
And
of
sorry,
questions,
can I just pick up Katie's
nearly
point
over
over
time.
there? I don't represent a particular university, so I can say this, and I'm probably going to make myself unpopular. There is such a competition in the university world, particularly now. There is a reduction in the number of 18-year-olds going through. All universities are competing for students. And there is a tendency within that to people to hold that best practice to themselves and say, we are the best, please come to us. And I can understand that. But the way you're going to get more examples of this young lady's amazing work is by working together.
Thank you.
So I would absolutely encourage the profession, not my profession, but really please do look at how you can come together as an industry and a profession rather than the universities being set up to compete against one another.
Thank you. So we're going to go around once more. Lots of little cluster here. Actually, you're going to take every question. Everybody who's got their hand up, we're going to have a quick sweep. Try to make recommendations when you ask your question and make it brief, please. We have just 5 minutes.
Okay, well, in 5 minutes, thank you very much for all that you said. I think you said, Simon, one of the key themes is this collaboration. And we say that a lot, we throw it around a lot, but what do we actually mean by that? And I think what's necessary is to consider that collaboration is a skill in itself and a muscle which needs to be built. And we need to give time to make that happen. We need to train people to make that happen. And in a lot of the big projects that I see around the country, like the garden cities, where the local authorities have probably never seen a project like this before, nor have many of the teams in the same type of environment, they all don't know how to collaborate. And I think that they need to make a process for themselves. And actually that's what my organisation is doing with these sort of multidisciplinary teams, you know, showing them what it is to collaborate and what the process is to collaborate. It doesn't happen by itself.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair Dixon from Collective Works. I really support the collaboration between practice and academia that we're hearing about, both Reading and Bath. But Emma's point about competition, I do worry about between practices. I think we've got a real fear of competition, and we don't share knowledge between practices, both small and even at large practices, where we're seeing ethical codes being developed by much larger practices. Why aren't they shared? Why aren't bigger practices actually talking about these things together? I think it's a really important point to have a forum for this here or elsewhere.
Thank you. And there was one there. Yes, thank you.
I don't really have much of a question, but it's more of a suggestion. My name's Hannah Appadoo, and I work for Katie Barker at Direct Line Structures. And I'm a part-time master's student at De Montfort University in Leicester, and obviously I'm working part-time as well. And I can just say, this is the second practice I've worked for, but I had no idea that I'd be working for a design and build company. And I can just say that, firstly, I think that we do have collaboration now. That's something I've seen during my master's course rather than my undergraduate course, that the tutors are recognising that the part-time students are gaining so much more than full-time students. And I'm really happy that there is an apprenticeship starting, and I just wish that it had started a lot further, like before.
So your recommendation is?
Well, I'm just making a comment that I think the collaboration is really key, but also that my previous practice, I just felt like there was a misinterpretation of what going into practice was about, and I feel like in this current company, being able to collaborate with other disciplines, I've actually got a better experience because I'm seeing the construction process, design and construction process from start to finish, rather than just producing master plans and plans that I would have no idea where they're going to. And I think that students would benefit from more of that kind of collaboration.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I think there was... Where? Over there? Over there. Okay, yep.
It's just a comment. I would like to say that being a member of the RIBA, it's only about 30 years ago that an architect was not allowed, it was in private practice, you could not go into the construction industry yourself, but it's to be recommended that this is now happening.
Thank you. That's absolutely right. Was there anything else up there? No? Good. Everybody's had their say, which is wonderful. Can I come to the panel and ask each of you to make, in reverse order from Alex back to Flora, a final closing comment and make hopefully a key recommendation. Alex?
Oh, starting off me. I'll stick to my two earlier suggestions, but thank you very much for listening. It's been an engaging conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity of shamelessly plugging my institution in another forum. Thank you.
I like your plants as well.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Katie. That's nice.
Thanks very much. Simon?
I would say that it's fairly straightforward to divide up sort of the professional, the attitudes of our industry into three sort of sectors. One is the art, which got mentioned. The second one is the skills and the business and the entrepreneurial attitude. And both those two get talked about quite a lot. The third, professionalism, the way we approach this, the standards that we operate to, our values particularly, and the ethics which we use to underpin them, don't just get discussed enough. We need to discuss them more, which is why we're having the session in about an hour's time over there.
Yeah.
Do come along. The idea is to start to forge the language of ethical discussion. And it is going to be a discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Emma?
I think I would just like to say that there are some really good examples that are coming through, but it's really important that we grasp those and move them forward for everybody. And really interested in kind of Simon's work and how we can apply that to environmental standards as well. So we'll follow up after this. And go Katie, brilliant.
Thank you. Flora?
I would just like to suggest that people, if you haven't got a business strategy, and 60% of architects don't have a business strategy, you should have one. You should develop it with your research strategy. And those practices that are doing this well tend to be the happiest practices, with the least churn and the best paid. So if you don't want to get yourself sorted out on where you're going to go, you can watch other people zoom past you in the future.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed these presentations. As always, you have more questions than we have time to discuss. I would love to ask Simon, for example, to professionally place carpentry in this story, because in a way we're talking about professional standards as applying to the old professions, the architects, engineers, and so on. But who's not a professional now? Who is without those standards? And how do we make these silos, these distinctions? And how do we claim kind of a unique and separate position in opposition? That, I think, is a very important issue that parallels the whole ethical debate. But thank you very much for your contributions. Let's thank the panel in the traditional way.